Seems like lately the weather just can't make up its mind. Pouring rain, icy wind, then more pouring rain again. Oh well, while it does, I guess we'll enjoy some cozy horror. With me, Dr. Plague. So good to see all of you today, and I hope we'll see more of you in the days to come. We all experience little kindnesses in our life. Maybe someone pays for our food at the drive-thru. Maybe someone lets you into traffic when they don't necessarily have to. But let's hope the kindness you experience is unlike what we're about to hear about. After all, this little kindness might be a little more than you would expect. Mel was having a cup of coffee at his favorite little spot one day when something would take place that he would never forget. He was sitting at the bar area, people watching, as he often did, when an older man and his granddaughter walked in. The two were a study in contrast. She a young waif so full of life and potential, he a stunted creature whose life was almost used up. His cane was barely audible over the general clamor, but Mel still heard the harsh chock, chock, chock as he walked across the tiled floor. The sight of him made Mel chuckle, though every step seemed to threaten to spill him to the floor. He held the girl's hand in his wrinkled one, and she beamed up at him with genuine love. They were standing in line for a booth, the coffee shop very busy, and as the girl gabbled happily to herself, the old man leaning on his stick, taking it all in as if just happy to be able to still take in anything. Mel felt that his interest was becoming voyeuristic, but he just couldn't look away from the pair. They were so different from the usual people that flitted into the shop, and it appeared that he wasn't alone. Two women and one of them had noticed the pair as well. Mel spent some time observing them as well, hoping to see the same interest or happiness that he had felt. But what he saw was very different. The girl appeared to be filled with a mixture of trepidation, fear, and resolve that Mel had never seen before. Mel had felt like a voyeur, but the young girl was like a hawk who's seen a rabbit. She didn't look away, seemed unself-conscious of her attention, and had eyes only for the little girl and her grandfather. The other said something to her, grabbed her arm fretfully, but she pulled away as she said something quick and harsh to her. As they waited, the little girl suddenly noticed the pair and told the girl how pretty she looked. The girl's attention was broken suddenly as she looked down at the little girl in surprise. She bent down on a knee, and Mel could see her point to the little girl's shirt and say something that made her giggle. Then she pointed to the old man, her lips asking if this was her grandpa, and the girl giggled as she answered that this was her papa as she clung to the man's hand. He turned to give the girls a slight nod and a smile before turning back to the barista who had arrived to seat them. The two girls watched them go before seeming to decide to come to the bar, where Mel was sitting instead of waiting for a booth as well. As they took their seats beside him, the one who had been watching so intently was still staring at the pair. As the old man smiled happily at the young girl and the doll that she was dancing across the table, the girl's face kept that same look of resolve. She clearly had something to do, something she was loath to do, but had to do, nonetheless. It was clear that it had something to do with the old man and his daughter. "They're quite the pair, aren't they?" Mel asked, making her jump as she blushed shyly, having been caught looking. "You have no idea," she said, her accent strange and exotic. Mel thought she might be from the Middle East, or maybe Northern Europe. The barista came around about that time and took her order. Mel couldn't help but notice the resemblance. The two girls were quite dark, their hair long and black as it spilled down their backs, and as the one with the intense stare leaned in to whisper to the waitress, Mel saw the new girl look over at the pair sitting at the table. She nodded and brought the two girls coffee as she went to bustle in the kitchen. "Do you know them?" Mel asked, becoming very curious as the exchange went on. "Unfortunately, I do," the girl told him. sipping her coffee. The longer he looked at the girl, the more Mel suspected that she was foreign. This was Sweden, of course. There were foreigners everywhere these days. But she also looked foreign in that way that people look out of time. The girl, as he thought of her, was likely in her mid-20s, but her eyes led him to believe that she had lived more in those 20 years than Mel had in his 37. She had lived through terrible times, seen atrocities, and had come out on the other side. He noticed movement from the table where the little girl sat with her father, and she squealed a little as a mountain of whipped cream and sprinkles was delivered atop some chocolate confection. To the father went a far more sensible coffee and a scone, and Mel thought the old man might have made out better. The shop's scones were to die for, and were less likely to put you into diabetic shock. "You probably just made that little girl's day," Mel said offhandedly, guessing the woman had sent the order there. She sighed. "I hope so. I would like to give her some joy on what may be the worst day of her life." Mel looked at her questioningly, but the woman had eyes only for the old man as he sipped before adding sugar to his coffee. "I met him in 2007 when I was 12 years old, and I've spent the last 17 years tracking him down. He has been my sole obsession, my reason for living, and every time I thought I might simply lie down and die, his face pushes me on." She stiffened a little as he looked down at the scone, but his granddaughter did something to steal his attention, and he looked away. "Must be a hell of a story," Mel commented. "Would you like to hear it?" she asked, still not looking away from the old man. "It appears we have some time." Mel wanted to decline, but instead he nodded as he invited her to continue. "It all started when the Russian army invaded our lands." When she started talking, there was no way that he could make her stop. Once she got started, there was no way he would want her to. "When I was little, we lived on a farm far from here. Our town was small, little more than a farming community, but we were happy. My family kept goats, sheep, chickens, cows, and horses. We made a living selling milk and eggs, wool and cheese, and our family was large. I had 9 siblings, 5 boys and 4 girls, and we helped my mother and father with the daily chores and the running of the farm. So when the Russian army pushed a little further, we became afraid. We could see the smoke, we could hear the gunfire sometimes, and the army was nowhere to be seen. The townspeople raised a militia, but it was no match for the might of the Red Army. They shot our young soldiers, our hunters, our ranchers, and marched into the town over the backs of the broken. We could see them from our farm. Father had not joined them, and we knew that the bad times would soon be upon us." She paused, watching as the man took the scone in his hand before setting it down again. She sighed, saying something in a language I didn't know, before continuing. "We were all brought into the town the next day, some of us by force, and taken to the meeting hall in town so we could meet our new overseer. The mayor had stood with the men of the militia and had been killed, so the man who stood on the stage was as different from the mayor as night to day. The mayor was a big bear of a man, and he was kind to his friends and neighbors. This man, slight and wearing a military uniform, looked more like Father Christmas. He was an older man, his face a smiling mask that he showed us with great excitement. His eyes, however, reflected none of the smile on his face. He told us his name was Major Krishker, and that he would treat us as well as we treated him. That turned out to be a lie. For the first few weeks, all proceeded as normal. The soldiers and the overseers toured the town, took in the farms, saw the markets, met the people. The man was courteous, but his sharp eyes missed nothing. The people thought that maybe the occupation would not be so bad. Perhaps he would be a kind overseer, and when he moved on, the town would still be as it had been. They could not have known how short a time that peace would be. It began with simple theft. The soldiers came to our farms and demanded that we give them a portion of our crops. Not much, they said, only an amount that came to around 25% of our total crop. Now, the mayor had always requested a third, so Father was excited that he wanted less. The mayor had already taken his share, however, and Father told the soldiers this. Taking more would cut into the food we had for winter, but the soldiers said he didn't care. "You will give us what we ask for, or it will be taken," they said, and thus we gave it to them. My brothers, none of whom had gone to fight, became angry at this, but Father told them it would be okay. It is not winter yet, and we will grow a little more before it comes. Next came the conscriptions. They told every male over the age of 16 in the village that they would be conscripted into the Red Army. They would be trained, they would be paid, and they would be able to send money back to their families. 3 of my brothers were of this age, and they were taken for training, despite their protests. My father continued to say that this was okay. They would send money back, and our lives might be better. Father had forbidden any of his children to join the militia, but it seemed the war would take them nonetheless. My older brothers left on a truck that day, and we never received money or letters, or saw them ever again. Mel began to worry about the direction of this story. He was expecting a heartwarming tale about someone helping a town in a time of strife. He had hoped that maybe the girl was repaying a kindness to the old man, but the longer the story went on, the less and less he thought it was so. Taking another look at the little girl, who was dancing her doll around the sugary confection, Mel thought she looked different from the old man, who sat across from her. Her hair was darker, her features less harsh, but she was young, and he was very old. With so many of the men gone, next came the brutality. The soldiers didn't need to tax anymore. They came and took what they wanted. Our cows, our chickens, our sheep, our goats, our crops. Even a few of my sisters were taken in by the soldiers and came back with bruises and tear-streaked faces. I was young, but I saw the look they gave me as well. My father kept me home, not wanting me to go to the village, but when the food prices rose and our trade began to dwindle, Father found it hard to feed his remaining children. It was only myself, my younger sister Hetz, and my other sister, Gretel, and my older sister, Farah, and, of course, my older brother, Philip. Mother and Father tried their best, but when the overseer came to our farm one day, Father knew he couldn't hide me any longer. He came to the house, introducing himself as if we didn't already know who he was, and sat at my parents' table to discuss the reason for his visit. He insisted I be there, a girl barely 13, and I remember hating the way he looked at me. He said he had seen me in the market and wanted me to come and stay with him at his villa, saying he would give me a better life and offer me opportunities I wouldn't receive here. Father knew why he wanted me. We all did, but my surprise was real when he agreed. He took the man's hand and promised to send me to him the very next day. "Let us get her ready, and we will bring her to your villa tomorrow," he said to the overseer. And the man was happy. He left, and Father got to work. He knew what it would mean if he defied this man, and he had seen the stockades in the square, but he didn't care. They had taken his oldest sons, his livelihood, and he'd be damned if he would let them take his daughter, too. Father loaded me into a grain wagon, and my siblings took me out of town. As we left, I peeked from the back and realized I could be seeing my home for the last time. I found it hard to be quiet as we went, and my crying must have attracted attention. Some of the soldiers stopped us and threatened to search the wagon. Farah was the oldest. Father had tasked her with keeping us safe, and when she offered to go off with the soldiers if they would let us pass, we knew we would never see her again. My brother Philip took the reins, and we left Farah behind. I never saw my parents again. I never saw my brothers again. We kept moving until we came to a town where we had cousins. They helped us and gave us shelter, but I never forgot that man or what he did to our village. We learned later that he took all he could from the land and left it to ruin. He hung my father and my mother and took Farah as his wife. He left us orphans, destitute, and I've never stopped thinking about that man. When I heard that he had fled here to escape justice after being declared a war criminal, I knew our time for revenge had come. Mel had been so focused on the story that he didn't look back at the man until he started gagging. His hands were on his throat, his face puffing as he hacked, and the little girl was now asking if he was okay. There was real fear in her voice, and people were trying to help him. But in the fuss, only Mel saw the other girl, the one who had come in with the storyteller, take the girl by the hand and lead her away. The little girl looked back only a single time, calling for her papa, before the two left. Mel heard the storyteller get up, but before she left, she turned to give him one final detail. The little girl is my niece, Farah's child by this man who is old enough to be her grandfather. Farah died before he went into hiding, but when we heard that he had fled with a little girl, we knew what we had to do. I remembered one other thing when I was planning this. When he came to the house to ask my father to send me, he told my mother 3 things as she offered him tea and cakes. The first was that he took his coffee black. The second, that he could not abide dairy. And the third was that he had a strong allergy to nuts. She smiled, dipping into a bow as the barista who had served the two told her it was time to go. When you tell the people how I killed one of Russia's monsters, tell them I killed him not with a gun, not with a sword, but with a scone that hid a hand full of walnuts. Makes me wish I had a scone of my own. Something with some nuts and some flaky pastry would go really well with this coffee I've got here. But I guess I'll just have to persevere. We've all had experiences online, I'm sure. Maybe we've met someone, a friend or a lover, or something that developed into more. But let's hope when you have your next online liaison, you don't run afoul of something a little different. Maybe find a Lisa of your own. Good afternoon, beautiful. Paul had rushed home from work, just like he had every day for the past 2 weeks. Reagan and Frank had said something about drinks after their shift, but he'd barely heard them. He had only one thought on his mind, the same thing he had for the past 2 weeks. Lisa. Man, you're falling way too hard for this gal, Frank had told him, as he made the usual excuses. You don't even know what she looks like, he added, before Paul could make his escape. Sure I do, Paul protested, and turned to go. 5'5", 100 pounds even, long brown hair, B-cup with mossy green eyes, and a love of classical music. Reagan had scoffed. I didn't ask what her profile said, man. He'd rolled his eyes and took another puff off his cigarette. I asked if you knew what she looked like. She looks like an angel, boys, and this angel's waiting for me. And with that, he'd been off. He'd rushed home through 2 blocks of busy Chicago streets to sink happily into his chair and find her online. Lisa. Just saying her name made his heart race. Lisa had found him, actually sought him out after reading something he'd posted on a forum. They started talking, and from day one it seemed like they had known each other for years. It seemed as though years themselves had passed by while she was with him, though it could have been seconds. Nothing else mattered when she was online. He went to bed later and later each night, not wanting to stop talking to her for a second. And strangely, she didn't seem to mind at all. She was as smitten with him as he was with her. A perfect match. "Hi, Polly. Rough day today?" She was so cute. After 2 weeks, Paul had been hard-pressed to find anything he didn't like about her. The way she called him Polly, the way she always asked about his day, the way she always remembered important things he'd told her, even when he couldn't, the way her words seemed to smile at him. She was something he'd always wanted. She was everything he'd always wanted. "Much better now that you're here, Lisa," he said. "Aw, you're such a teaser. I've been waiting for my Polly all day, and now I finally have you." "You sure do. I'm all yours, baby." The scream of the alarm clock brought him back to reality. It had been such a good night last night, but now it was time for another fun-filled day of work. Last night, just thinking about it made his heart race again. They had talked till almost dawn. He'd only stopped when his eyes had gotten heavy and finally betrayed him. She was a technician, his Lisa. She just kept on talking, kept on laughing, only wanting more of him. He felt his face redden as he lurched into the kitchen and turned on the tiny television by the counter. A man in a gray suit was pointing at a weather map and talking about the weekend weather as Paul poured milk on his sugar flakes. The man was finishing up his report as Paul leaned against the counter, and the camera turned back to a bubbly young woman and a middle-aged man dressed in a similar gray suit. "For those of you just joining us, our top story remains the murder of the mayor and his wife early this morning. Police responded to screams in the early morning hours and found both victims stabbed multiple times. Though the murder weapon, like much else about the murder, has not been released, police have said that they have a suspect in custody. Pretty unsettling stuff, wouldn't you say, Megan?" The bubbly brown-haired woman on his side nodded fervently. "Unsettling indeed. The murders come just a week after the mayor's inflammatory remarks concerning the rights of ID workers after their second week on strike. He was a firm opponent of artificial rights in—" But Paul turned it off and put the empty bowl in the sink. The news was so depressing these days. People being murdered in their own homes. These damn ID workers thinking they could demand rights all of a sudden. And to top it all off, there was so much anti-ID sentiment that the city was becoming a melting pot of chaos. "At least I've got my Lisa. The struggles of the world don't mean much as long as I've got her," he said to himself. Paul beamed all the way to work. He passed other people on the street, making their way to work, home, or wherever they were going this time of morning. He didn't care. He was on cloud 9. He just really didn't have time to pay any more attention. He had a checklist of things he needed to get done today, and as he rounded 8th Street and proceeded to Wellington, he ticked them off. He had a meeting at 1 to prepare for. He'd be introducing his product findings for the quarter. Then at 3, he had his next quarter numbers to send to the boss. Then it was home to spend his evenings in the virtual embrace of Lisa. Somewhere along the way, he'd see his friends, have lunch, pick up dinner, but that too seemed secondary next to the idea of talking to Lisa. He sighed, wishing it were 3 already. There was a big crowd outside when he arrived, and he could see police tape across the doors. Mr. Marshall, the office director, was talking loudly to a uniformed man, and several officers were carrying out computers, taking fingerprints, removing fragments from the door. Paul slid in next to Frank. As usual, Reagan was late, but it didn't look like anyone would be getting any work done today. "What happened?" Paul asked in a hushed voice, as one of the officers brought a filing cabinet out on a hand dolly. "Seems there was a break-in last night," said Frank, making no effort to keep his voice low. "A break-in? What could anybody possibly want in our office? I mean, we sell computer chips. We don't even keep them on site." "No clue," said Frank, as Reagan slid in next to him. A blonde woman, Paul thought her name was Frances, leaned back and said in a low voice, "Agnes was the first person in this morning. She said the front door to the Human Resource Office was destroyed, and 2 filing cabinets were wrenched open. She thinks they were after files or something." Paul's brow creased as he contemplated the mystery that had suddenly and possibly led to him not having to work today. He smiled a little to himself, thinking that sounded like a pretty good day to him. And so they gave us the rest of the day off, and tomorrow, with pay. That's wonderful, Polly. I'm glad you got some time to rest after such a stressful week. They had been talking all morning. As lunchtime came around, Paul's stomach made a low, pitiful rumble. He ignored it, though. This was right where he wanted to be. As it rumbled again, though, an idea began to form. Stomach's trying to tear me away from you, he commented offhandedly. Oh, do you need to get some lunch? Well, actually, I was hoping you'd maybe meet me somewhere. Maybe Gabriel's on 7th? They make a mean hoagie. The message hung for a couple of minutes. My treat, he added, not liking the silence. I don't know, Polly, she finally said after a few more seconds of silence. Lisa, if I'm being honest, I like you, and I would like to take our relationship to a more three-dimensional level. Won't you please consider a date with me? She hesitated before responding. I'm sorry, Polly. I'm just not ready yet. There are things about myself I'm not quite comfortable with. I can't face you. Not yet, Polly. Just be patient with me. I'm new to this kind of thing. Polly sighed. You're a girl worth waiting for, Lisa. A girl as pretty as you can take their time. Oh, Polly, you always know just what to say to make a girl smile. So, Paul, how's that lady of yours? Paul kept his eyes on his computer. This document had to be finished before he left at 3. The break-in had been a week ago, but the office was still trying to get back into their usual routine. Fine, he said, returning to typing. So, when's the first date? Frank asked as he stirred lazily at his coffee. He'd been getting pretty nosy after the break-in, and his questions were becoming suffocating. Between Frank and Reagan, he was lucky to get a moment's peace. They were continuously asking him out for drinks or to stop by unannounced to hang out, which seemed to entail keeping him off the computer and squarely in the real world. He was already irritable from the lack of sleep, and he really didn't need this today. He couldn't say why, but he was sure someone had been on the fire escape last night. He'd woken up several times to a shadow cast across his bed and the foreboding feeling of being watched. The shadow would move as soon as he tried to see what it was, until finally he'd slept facing away from the window and hadn't been bothered for the rest of the night. His conversations with Lisa had gotten more involved as well, to his great joy. The intimacy of the questions often made him blush, and she seemed ravenous to know everything about him. The minutest details seemed to only stoke the flames of her curiosity, and Paul felt giddy as she shared more of herself with him. Meetings, however, remained a shaky bit of ground. We have a set one, he said curtly, as he continued about his business. It was getting late, nearly 3, and his work wasn't done. He'd have to stay late to finish, and that was precious time that he couldn't spend with Lisa. Geez, Paul, you've been talking to this gal for a month now, and you still haven't met her? I don't recall asking your opinion on my relationship, Frank. Paul snapped and instantly felt ashamed. Sorry, I'm just tired. I didn't sleep well last night again. He didn't dare tell anyone about the shadow. People would think he was nuts. It's fine, buddy. I can tell you're hurting for sleep. I just don't want to see you get burned, you know? These gals online find a nice guy like you, and they bleed him dry, Paul. Can we change the subject? Paul begged. Frank nodded, taking the hint. You hear about the disappearance of that scientist from the facility? Of course Paul had. It was all over the news. They think now that the ID might have been involved. You know, our company had something to do with them in the first place. So maybe they think we need a little revenge on our own. Paul was about to say this really wasn't a topic for work when the clock struck 3, and Paul happily filed his report away and turned his computer off for the night. Another fun-filled evening with your make-believe lady, Frank asked, and Paul pulled his windbreaker on over his work shirt. Lisa's a real person, Frank. I wish you could see her the way I do sometimes. Then maybe you'd stop with all these stupid questions. Frank scoffed. Make sure you get some sleep, buddy. You look kind of beat. Thanks, Mom, Paul said, as he threw his messenger bag over his shoulder and headed for the door. As he neared his apartment, Paul saw an unfamiliar woman near the mailboxes. She was bent at the knee, reading the names on the mailboxes through squinted eyes. Her long brown hair tumbled down her back, and she was dressed simply in a green t-shirt and cut-off jeans. She was gorgeous by anyone's standards, and she was receiving a good number of stares from the passers-by. Paul realized with embarrassment that he was one of them. He shook himself out of his daze. Lisa would be waiting for him. As he walked towards the door, though, the woman straightened suddenly and looked at him oddly. "Polly?" she said excitedly. "Lisa?" The words were out of his mouth before he could stop them. Subconsciously, he had known it was her, but he hadn't dared to hope it could be true. She hugged him briefly, and he returned the gesture. Her arms were certainly firm for someone so small, he thought, as she crushed him against her. She definitely wasn't as big a homebody as he'd thought, and he reflected that making her mad might be a bad idea. "It's so nice to finally meet you in person. I was worried when I couldn't find your name on the mailboxes." Paul could only look at her with astonishment. She was here. She was finally here. Her hands were in his. Her voice was like honey poured over a sonnet. Her hair tumbled easily down the back of her neck in warm, thick sheets. Her eyes seemed to smile at him from under her bangs. She was a vision, a goddess. Paul could feel the blood pumping in his ears as she spoke. The edges of his world were blurring. "Paul, is everything okay?" He sighed, clearing the butterflies from his stomach. "I'm just so surprised you're here." She smiled and placed a delicate finger to her cheek, crooking the other under her chin. "Is it a good surprise?" she asked coyly. He grinned. "The best." "Are you sure I can't make you something to eat?" Paul had easily made enough pasta for 5 people, let alone 2. His attention had been elsewhere, on that perfect goddess that sat in his dining room. She seemed drawn to him, too, never looking away, never tiring of his face, as he stood there at the stove, cooking the only dish he knew. Bachelor life was tough, but spaghetti was easy. "Oh, no, it's fine. I already ate before I came," she said quickly. Paul spun his fork absent-mindedly as she continued to stare at him. He popped a roll of spaghetti in his mouth and gasped. It was hot. The noodles burned the roof of his mouth suddenly, and his hands groped for his wineglass. She giggled, and he took a long sip as he grimaced at the bitter taste of cheap wine. "Do I distract you that much?" she asked innocently. Paul grinned sheepishly. "Kind of a lot. I hate to think you had to walk all the way here just to see me. You should tell me next time, and I'll..." He remembered something then. "Well, I guess I won't be able to walk you here since I don't think you've ever told me where you live." "No, it's fine. I don't mind. Any excuse to see you," she purred as she dodged the question. They both blushed, and Paul took another bite of spaghetti. His heart was pounding. What was she doing here? Not that he wasn't pleased to see her after a month of conversations, but a woman like this could have any man she wanted. Why would she settle for a lowly cubicle jockey like me, he thought. "So, did you find the place okay?" he asked, hoping to break the silence. "Oh, yeah. It was quite a nice walk. I'm jealous you get to see this every day to work. The stores are likely just opening when you head out, and I can only imagine what kind of smells and sounds you must hear." Paul took another bite and then another as she spoke. When had he told her where he worked? Or for that matter, where he lived? He tried to remember as she went on and on about the scenery, but he just couldn't remember. His face must have said more than he meant it to, because she looked at him and asked, "What are you thinking about so hard, Polly?" And then it was all gone. She laid her fingers across her cheek again and cocked her head just so, and he was putty in her hands. "Oh, nothing. I thought maybe we could watch a movie." "I hope you have something romantic," she said, with a little giggle. So she just showed up out of the blue. "That's right," Paul said, triumphant. He'd met Frank and Reagan for lunch at one of the sports bars near his apartment. They'd wanted to watch the Bears play, and neither was well stocked for food at their place. The sports bar was packed, likely more Bear fans, and the noise was deafening. It was so surreal. She just showed up, out of the blue, and stayed with me all night. He could feel his face turning red, but he couldn't let them see. "All night, huh?" Reagan said with a grin. Paul laughed. "Not like that. We just sort of sat around and enjoyed each other's company." "Uh-huh," said Reagan, unconvinced. Frank seemed thoughtful, though, so she just showed up. Paul looked at him. Yeah? Funny. Thought you said she was nervous about meeting you. I guess she got over it, Paul said with a shrug. Funny how you never mentioned switching addresses with this mystery girl. Paul furrowed his brow. That's right, yeah. Come to think of it, I didn't remember giving her my address. I suppose I must have forgotten, though. We've been talking for months. It was bound to come up. And your work, too? Did that come up all of a sudden? A chill ran down Paul's spine. Now that you mention it... Hey, what's with the third degree here, Frank? Doesn't strike you as odd that this girl just showed up out of the blue without being invited and without being told where you live or where you work? This is Chicago, Paul. Do you have any idea what the chances of meeting someone at a specific time and place with no clue where that place is are? 1 in a million. Just like this girl, Paul chuckled. Be serious, Paul. You may think this is endearing, but we have a word for people like that, and it's called stalker. But he faltered as a shadow fell across the table. Paul looked up and into the wet, moss-colored eyes of his angel. Lisa was there, carrying a glass of beer and wearing a Bears jersey. She had obviously heard the conversation. Paul barely got her name out before she was running for the door of the crowded bar, beer crashing to the floor in a foamy wave. Lisa, wait! Lisa! Paul was on his feet and after her in a second. He pushed through the crowd of people, most cursing and shouting in his wake. But as he exited to the street, he found no trace of Lisa. No, he sobbed, grabbing the building for support. She was gone. She'd run away from him, and now he'd never see her again. His stomach felt like he'd swallowed a hot brick. Tears came unbidden to his eyes. Dude, I'm sorry, said Frank. I didn't mean to. Paul didn't remember slipping it to the ground, but Frank's hand was reaching for him, and he slapped it away angrily. Next time, why don't you just keep your goddamn mouth shut? He shouted as he lurched to his feet and began running for his apartment. Paul sighed as he walked home after another busy day at the office. It had been 5 days. 5 days since his fight with Frank. 5 days since he'd seen Lisa's tear-streaked face. She hadn't been online at all. No emails or visits either, and Paul was beginning to worry that he would never see her again. She had looked so upset at the bar, he wondered if she truly thought he believed Frank's suspicions. Frank. There was another mystery. No one had seen or heard from Frank since Saturday. He hadn't shown up to work all week, and Reagan said there was no answer at his apartment. As mad as Paul had been at Frank for his ill-timed outburst, he couldn't pretend he wasn't worried about him. They had been friends for years, and his disappearance was more than a little unsettling with all the ID intolerance going on. Paul sighed as his key scraped the lock. What was he going to do? He'd lost his best friend and the love of his life in one fell swoop. The red light was blinking on his machine when he got home, and when he pressed it, the voice he expected to hear wasn't there. Polly, it's Lisa. I know I have a lot to answer for, but I was wondering if you'd like to come over so I can try to explain what's been going on. Her address followed, along with some directions. Paul listened to the message 4 times, drinking in the sound of her voice, and there was hurt in it that almost brought Paul to tears. They made him feel guilty as he left his apartment and trekked the familiar path downtown. Lisa lived in a large brick building in one of the nicer parts of the city. He found her apartment easily, and when he knocked, a little voice told him to come in. As he entered, he couldn't help but notice the long red streak up the floor. Paul had never seen blood, but he'd seen enough cop dramas to know what the start of a crime scene looks like. A chill swept over him as he entered. She was sitting on the couch, a fire burning in the grate. She turned to look at him, and her angelic face was a welcome sight. As she spread her arms wide and ran to him, Paul was surprised that he didn't cringe away from her, especially since her hands were caked in blood. I'm so sorry, Paul. I'm sorry for everything, but it's okay now. No one will stop us from being together. Paul saw over her shoulder that the red streak led to the nearby bathroom, and the bottom fell out of his stomach. Lisa, what have you done? Her face clouded up, and tears appeared in the corners of her eyes. I had to, Paul. I had to kill him. He was suspicious of me.
He'd been suspicious of me from the start. If he kept digging, he would find out I was the one who broke into your office, and Paul pushed her away gently but firmly. Wait, that was you? I was intrigued by you, Paul. I had to know more. I had to. I had to see you, hear you, know you without you seeing me. I had to be sure, Polly. I had to be sure I could trust you. Lisa, you're the one that's been coming to my window at night, aren't you? She looked away, ashamed. You stole my address, my phone number. You broke into my office just a what, Lisa? What did you hope to gain? She was crying again, and when she looked up at him, he could see her honesty as she answered, You, Paul. You're all I've ever wanted. You're all I ever hoped to gain. His blood ran cold. His breath came out in troubled gasps. He felt like someone was tearing his lungs out. How could this angel be so tainted? A criminal? A stalker? A killer? Why would you do this, Lisa? Why would you... But he stopped. She had taken his breath away again. Her hands had begun to deftly pull behind her hair, bringing her face away from it. Her perfect face had fallen away like a Halloween mask, and she had brushed away the stray strands that clung to her. As the fleshy roll hung from her neck, Paul could see a pill-shaped metal cylinder staring back at him through two yellow-tinted eyes. When she spoke, no mouth opened, but her voice was still Lisa's. Because I'm not human, Paul. Because there are people who don't think I deserve a normal life. Paul took a step back, horror spreading across his face. What are you? He breathed, his breath coming out in gasps, like someone had punched him in the stomach and never pulled their hand away. Why, Paul? Don't you remember? I'm Lisa, L-model intimacy servo automaton, and I'm all yours, Polly.
Rain's really coming down out there. I'm glad we've got a nice warm place to tell stories and enjoy each other's company while we wait for it to pass. My family is no exception in the leaving of weird things department. I've got some guns from Granddad and letters and books from other family members that just remind me of them, remind me of the time we spent together, and really give me some warm memories of them. However, when you discover that your father might have been closer than you thought he was, it always helps to have some proof, especially when that proof comes in the form of letters in the attic. I inherited my parents' old house about a year ago. As a single guy in his mid-20s, this was quite a windfall. My mom had died of a stroke in the upstairs bedroom, a room I kept mostly locked up. I never knew my dad. He split before I was born, but the house was something he left to my mom before disappearing. It was a house that had been in his family for generations, and it was the only piece of my father that I had left. My grandparents have been dead since before I was born, and my father was an only child. That being said, there was no real family to inherit the family estate, except for my mother and I. As an only child myself, my father had never really got around to siring any other brothers or sisters for me. I had never really wanted for much. Dad's estate took care of the bills, my education, and the upkeep of the house. I always kind of wished he had stuck around if he'd gone that far, but I suppose it had finally caught up with him. Mom always said that Dad was an eccentric, a scientist who studied weird stuff for a research facility, and whatever he did must have paid well, because I'd made it all the way through college without even touching the trust fund that Mom had set aside for me. And now, I had an 8-bedroom, 3-bath mansion in need of some serious renovations. I decided to start with the attic. The attic had always interested me, even when I was a kid. I used to play up there, looking into the old chests and peeking into armoires and scaring myself with make-believe ghost stories. It was nice up there, though. The stained-glass window that overlooked the street always made little rainbows on the wooden floor just for me. I wanted to clean it up a little bit and build an office up there so I could do my accounting and bookkeeping in peace. The problem was that it was structurally unstable. The wall was a crumbling old brick, the mortar trying to let go for the last 40 years or so. I was afraid it wouldn't take much more than one good windstorm to knock it in, and I really wanted to fix it up and work my way down. As I started cleaning it out, I was delighted to find that the attic might actually pay for its own renovations. It was packed with old furniture and antiques that I found some interest for with the local antique dealers. I took a few pictures on my phone and sent some to the local antique shops. They seemed all the more enthralled to get their hands on them. I separated off the stuff I wanted to sell, keeping a small pile of things that I did not. After a couple of days of men with dollies coming in and out of the house, I found myself about $25,000 richer. The old antiques had more than paid for the facelift, and I started looking at supplies to replace the old brick with. I didn't know if I'd have to replace the beams behind it, but I suspected that I might. Mom told me that Dad had said the attic was one of the few original parts of the house, which had apparently been built in the late 1700s. It was one of the first large homes to be constructed in the area, and his ancestors had received it from some fellow after working the land for him. They had been less indentured servants and more live-in caretakers. The man had hundreds of acres, a large farm, and several dairy cows that needed to be taken care of. My dad's forebears and their children had been more than up to the task, having recently emigrated from Ireland. When he had left it all to them in the will, they had suddenly become very rich and very powerful in what was an up-and-coming part of the world. That would make the attic nearly 300 years old, and the fact that it was still standing was a marvel in of itself. I had talked with a friend of mine who was a member of code enforcement for the city, and he had said to be careful when I started taking down the bricks. He said he was pretty certain they weren't load-bearing, but if the attic was as old as I had said, then it would be an accident waiting to happen. I'd been up in the attic during all kinds of weather, and I'd never seen it so much as sway in the wind. Whoever had built it had done some amazing work, and had actually built it to last. As I set to work taking down the first of the bricks, I did so with an ear out in case I needed to run. I had barely set my hammer to work when I saw something sticking out between a loose brick. It appeared to be an envelope, an old and yellow thing that likely would have crumbled to nothing had it not been sealed up in the wall. I reached out for it, wiping masonry dust off of it as I looked at the front. It was signed, "To my child," from Marcus Krim, and it was dated 1934. This gave me pause. As far as I knew, there was only one Marcus Krim that had ever lived in this house, and he had been my father. To my knowledge, though, he hadn't even been born in 1934. I set the letter aside, not really sure what to make of it, and kept working. The wall appeared to be held up not by wooden beams, but metal beams. That struck me as weird, because the means to do so in the 1700s would have been very difficult to achieve. They were crude metal beams, to be sure, but they were very thick and very sturdy, and had likely taken someone a very long time to put into place, without a crane or some sort of tools. However the architect had managed it, this was tremendous. I would save a lot of my recent windfall by not having to replace the wooden beams that I had assumed would be there, and decided that the flaky wall was just a product of its time. I was halfway through the north face of the wall when I found another letter. The front of this one read, "To my child," from Marcus Krim, 1984. The date on the letter seemed reasonable. My father would have been about 12 years old in 1984, but I doubted that he was writing letters and putting them in the masonry. I set it aside, wanting to get back to work, but it was hard not to open it to see what it contained. This one looked a lot newer than the other one, and I supposed it had spent a lot less time in the wall. Why my father was leaving letters for me inside the attic wall, I didn't know, but I supposed that when I was done for the day, I might sit down and see what he had written me. By midday, I had found 5 other letters, and my curiosity was piqued. I had found one from 1984, one from 1934, one from 1956, and another one from 1890. There was also a 5th from 1954. They had been stuffed in the wall behind loose bricks, popping out as I smashed up the wall with my sledgehammer. and as I broke for lunch, I decided that it might be time to have a look at them. I didn't know if this was some elaborate joke someone was playing on me or not, but the idea of getting letters from my father, a man that I had never known, was intriguing. Maybe the dates were code or something, and I wondered if there was some other treasure to be found in the house, besides the antiques in the attic, that was. I decided to open the letter from 1984 first, it being the closest to today's date. Inside was a handwritten letter in what I recognized as my father's meticulous script. I had seen some of his journals in the library, writings on physics and scientific theory, and I was familiar with the way that he wrote. He marked the envelope with a stamp, though I had no idea why, and it had been sealed with wax that was light as I broke it. Hello. As I have not learned your gender yet, your mother insists that it be kept a secret, I'll just call you Child. I suspect you have questions, and I wish I could answer all of them, but I fear this letter will be a poor explanation. Your mother may have told you that I was involved with an organization studying scientific principles. One of the principles they were interested in was time travel. It wasn't something I believed in, but I was willing to take their money and study their theories. I thought the concept was so much hogwash, but as we began to make breakthroughs, I had to admit that there was merit to it. I began to get excited, thinking we might actually break the secret of passing backwards and forwards in time. On the day of testing, we all drew straws to see who would be the one to test the device. I drew the short straw, so I was placed inside the chamber. I pray they did not send anyone after me, because it appears that something has gone terribly wrong. I closed my eyes in 1998 and opened them again in 1984. We'd done it. We could go back in time. But there was a problem. I had no way to return, and it appeared that my means of time travel was unstable. I arrived in December 1984, but 3 days later I was in September 1984. I was jumping backwards in time, little hops at first, but I suspected they might become progressively stronger as time went on. I don't know how to contact you, or if you'll ever find this letter, but I know the house has existed for at least 200 years. If I leave a letter in the attic, somewhere it's not likely to be stumbled across until someone is looking for something else, maybe you'll find it, and you'll know that I didn't abandon you and your mother. You'll know what actually happened. I'm going to break into your grandparents' house tonight and hide this in the attic. I remember that tonight was when they left me at my sitter's house and went out to see a late movie, so there should be more than enough time to get in and leave the letter in the wall of the attic. I hope it finds you well, and I hope that you are well. Sincerely, Marcus Krem. I was speechless for a moment, not sure what to make of it. Was this real? I'd known my father was a little eccentric. Mother said he towed the line between genius and crazy, but this was out there. Had my father been playing some elaborate joke before he left? Had he been trying to trick a small child into thinking that his father was just a time traveler and not a deadbeat? I didn't know, but it only made me more curious to see the other notes. I shifted through them until I came to the one from 1956. It was the next one in chronological order and seemed to be the best place to pick up the story. I opened it with a finger, wincing as the old paper sliced me a little, but I sucked at the paper cut as I spilled the paper onto the old desk. A few drops pattered onto the blotter, but the letter was spared, and as I sucked at it, I read what I had written there. Child, I've spent the last week shifting backwards every few days. Sometimes I would stay in a spot for days, sometimes it was seconds, but it seems I'm destined to live my life backwards. I always seem to stay in the same town, the town I grew up in, and it's odd to watch the town slowly grow younger, opening your eyes to see the town shrinking, a building at a time. I spent 2 weeks leaping backwards at various speeds, but when I finally came to rest in March of 1956, I felt jet-lagged. The town was half the size it had been. The cars as different from the turn of the century as they would be in the early 1900s. People looked at me strangely, my clothes likely appearing odd, but my money still worked. The teller would get a shock when he realized that they had a bill that wouldn't be circulated for 40 years, but I needed to eat. I didn't have a lot of money when I traveled, 100 and a couple of 20s in my wallet, but as the cost of things goes down, the money stretches a little further. Your grandfather, my dad, is so young. I saw him playing outside the house, a boy of maybe 10 or 11, and it was hard not to hail him and talk to him. I plan to break into the house again when the family is gone and leave this letter in the wall of the attic. I better do it soon. Who knows how long I'll have before I travel again. I hope you're doing well, and hope your mother is also well. It's strange to talk to someone you've never met, but I hope these letters shed some light on where I've been and why I haven't been in your life. I was beginning to think the notes had been left by my mother, but how would she so expertly duplicated his handwriting? All of Dad's journals were written like this, the same meticulous script, and it even sounded like the voice I'd always given him when I read his journals. He would sound like a scientist, like my science teacher had when I was in school, and as I reached for the next letter, I came across the one from 1934. The envelope was ancient-looking, the outside yellowed and sealed in the same wax the others had been. The wax on this one was brittle with age, and it crumbled under my fingers as I broke it. I started to slide my finger under the adhesive, but looked in the desk till I found the letter opener I remembered seeing there. A quick slash, and I had the note in my hand. Child, I went to sleep 2 days after delivering the letter to the wall, and woke up 60 years in the past. This was the longest jump I've ever made, and I had to write this one quickly before it sent me sailing off again. The town looks more like Mayberry from the Andy Griffith Show than the bustling city I remember. Main Street is here, as is the post office and the police station, but everything else has changed. There are stores, but they seem less grand than the ones here before them. The house is still here, and I can see my grandfather as he sits on the lawn with my grandmother, both of them in their senior year of high school. Grandpa will get his draft letter in 6 years, taking him out of the steel mill before the explosion that kills so many, saving him and probably saving me from not being born. Grandma will give birth to my father a year after that, and Grandpa will come back from France with a few scars and many memories to regale his son and later his grandson with. I never knew my great-grandfather, not well enough, and it's odd to see them as they go about their lives. I've seen men going into the house the last few days, men doing work on the study on the second floor, and have managed to get a pair of white overalls and a cap from a clothesline. Tomorrow I will mingle with them and drop this letter in the wall, if I'm not years farther from where I started by then. I sorted the remaining letters, my work forgotten, and decided on the one from 1890. It was the next one in sequence, though that sequence was far out of whack now. My hands shook a little as I opened it with the letter opener. Fake or not, someone had gone to a lot of trouble to set this up, and the story was so good that I had to know how it ended. My work was forgotten, the mystery too much for me to put down now. As the wax seal fell to brittle shards on the desk, I took out the thick and uncomfortable paper that had been laid into the equally heavy envelope. Child, it appears I sealed my letter in the wall at just the right time. The house was fumigated the next day, and it would have been nearly impossible to get back in. I also traveled again 4 days later, and this was one of my most hectic trips. I would be stuck in a time for a day or two, but just as I would pen a letter, I would be dragged backwards into something else. I've started trading my money for gold and silver as I go farther and farther back. I'll soon come to a time when paper money means nothing, and then I might as well burn the notes to keep me warm. Gold, however, maintains its value, as does silver, and so I now have a few actual dollars left, and some mintings of gold and silver on my person. I've got them hidden in a backpack that also seems to travel with me. I wish I had experimented with this a little more, but even though these letters are decades apart, I've really only lost a month at the most. It feels like just last week when I opened my eyes in 1984, but I'm becoming worried that I might be slowing down a little. This last trip has brought me to 1890, and the town is little more than a general store, a saloon, and a collection of frontier businesses. I had to steal more clothes. My modern attire marked me as an outsider. I'm thankful that I traded for gold. My money would be useless out here, but gold is always useful. The house is still here too, but I've skipped 4 or 5 generations. The house is now a plantation, the land worked by field hands, and the house is set considerably out of town. I went there to seek field work, but they thought I was a cousin who'd come to call. They put me up, showing a lot of the old world hospitality I've always heard so much about, which will make it easier to hide this letter. I hope I come to rest soon. I hope this stops. I go to sleep, I blink, and my heart is filled with dread on when I will open my eyes again. I hope you're well, and I hope you're living a better life than I. I exhaled, looking at the last letter. This one was marked 1854, and it appeared it was the last one I had. As I picked it up, a thought occurred to me. How many more letters could there be in these walls? How many more could there be that covered dates in between the ones I had found? I was no longer skeptical. Quite the contrary, I was hungry for more, and as I split this one open, I held the brittle paper gently, afraid it would fall apart before I got the chance to read it. Child, the traveling is definitely slowing down. I spent 3 months with my forebears in 1890. After that, I spent a month in 1880, 2 months in 1870, and now I've landed in 1854. I've returned to the house again, claiming to be a cousin, and it's odd to see the same people I saw in the 1890s, but years younger. The matron who invited me in is now a mere slip of a girl. Her brother, maimed in the war, is now a healthy young man, passionate about states' rights and the laws that govern man. I'm embarrassed to report that the field hands I saw earlier have been replaced with slaves, but I suppose that was to be expected. They accepted me into their home again, and I suppose I will stay here until I travel again. I hope you are well, and I hope you do not hate me too much. That was it, but I felt like I knew where I could find other letters. It was late into the night when all the bricks were torn down, and I looked amongst the rubble for any signs of paperwork. I'd started out being very careful, an archaeologist looking for old bones, but after hours of fruitless plinking, I began to level the walls with abandon. I no longer listened for the groans of old boards or the crash of the ceiling. The iron bracings had held the attic up this long. They would do it a while longer. I searched and searched, looking for something, and when I saw metal glinting beside a bracing, I went to it and found a lockbox made of rusted old iron. It was a relic, the metal so old it had begun to disintegrate in places, and I was careful as I knocked the lock off and pulled at the lid. I didn't think it would open for a terrible moment, but as it squealed apart like a funhouse door, I saw a tube inside with a wax cap at the end. Someone had written 1775 on the outside, and I opened it carefully as I dumped the fragile paper out beside the rest. If the paper from the last one had been fragile, then this one was almost elven. It felt like skin, and it was so thin that I could almost see through it. The ink was thick and flaky, clearly done with a real pen, and as I read it, I realized I had come to the end, or maybe the beginning. Child, 1770. I've come back as far as I'm able. The last year was a series of travels, back and back and back. Sometimes I might get as much as a week in one time, but usually it was hours. It seemed, however, that I have come to rest at last. I've been living on the land that will one day be our family home, and I realize that there is no old benefactor waiting for us to come and settle here. The land is still mostly trees, but I've come to the spot where our house will soon stand. I went into town, closest town I could find, and purchased it for what I would consider a pittance. The man at the trade office seemed surprised by the amount of gold I had on my person, but it would seem like nothing to someone from our time. I had co-workers who had begun to lay gold back for the coming millennium, sure that the banks would crash and the money would be useless, but out here, money is nothing more but paper and ink. I was able to buy 100 acres and secure enough supplies to build the house and start the farm. I've shown them how to make metal beams, something that I took for granted in my world of metal and glass. The house will be strong, no wooden beams to break and bend, and I secured enough strong backs to help me build it. 1773. The construction is done for the most part. The attic was difficult to build with their current level of technology, but I think they did okay. The house looks just like it always has, and as we set up the barn and the fields, I have begun to loan money to those who are in need. The interest alone has made me wealthy and become quite well known in the area. The workers I've hired have settled land nearby, and I believe they are establishing the town that will one day encompass this house. 1775. I've lived here for 5 years and have not traveled once in all that time. I think perhaps whatever moved me has dissipated, and I'm now here for good. The town is doing well. They've established a general store and are now a steady trade route on the road west. I have men who work the land for me, who tend the cows and the sheep as I sit in my mansion and rake in the profits. Life is good, but I am aware of what is to come. I'm no fool, and I know where this path will take me. 1780. I saw them today. They came to the house, asking for work. My 8 times great-grandfather came onto the porch with his hat in his hand and begged me for a job. He said his wife would be happy to be my cook, and his children would help with the land. That sounded fine to me. Most young men who helped me build the house and work the land have gone to fight in the Revolutionary War, and have been struggling to keep up with the chores around here. Thomas has 10 children, a good Irish Catholic family, and the youngest is old enough to help with the day-to-day affairs of the farm. I agreed to hire them on immediately. I am the generous benefactor my family legend speaks of, and I will be dead in the next 15 years. I may have stopped traveling, but I can feel my body aging faster than it should. 15 years is a long time, but I'm sure it will seem like no time at all to me. 1785. The war has been over for 2 years, but a lot of the men who went to fight haven't come back. I'm going to finish this letter and put it in the attic while I still have the strength to do so. I'm barely 50, but I look like a man in his 70s. I can barely make it up the stairs on a good day. I don't know how I will live another 10 years, but I know that if I don't get this on the wall, it may be my last chance. It's sobering to realize that I am the one who's responsible for my family's wealth, the one who made it possible for those who come before me to live in relative ease, but I suppose that that's the way of it. If you ever find this, I hope you won't hate me too much. It was not my intention to leave you, but I see now that I would have likely been a terrible father. My work held too much of my attention to ever take you to a baseball game or sit with you and spend an afternoon on the couch. I would have neglected you, and for that I am sorry. This, it appears, is my gift to you. Use it well. You never know when you might be called upon to make your own history. I love you, and I hope you are well. Yours always, Marcus Krim. I sat at the desk and just looked at the collection of letters. It was my dad. He had built the house. He had set our family up. Then he had died without telling them who he was. It was unthinkable, and I realized I had no way to prove any of it. There would be no records going back that far. The original owner of the house had lived before the town had, and the receipt of bill of sale would not have survived. I suddenly wished that Mom was here. She would have wanted to see the letters and would have likely believed them without question. I wished a lot of people were still there, but there was no one to substantiate these claims. I wondered if this was how Dad had felt as he walked to town to begin building his house. Had he felt so utterly alone, knowing that his only real family was still 10 years away in a place that he had never seen? I felt so alone, so utterly desolate, and I sat there looking at the letters and thinking until the sun made rainbows through the stained glass. As I did, I saw them fall on something I had missed. It was wedged far in the back, behind one of the braces, and I walked towards it like it might bite. It was another tube, this one carefully placed so that it wouldn't be jostled or broken when the time came for repairs. I opened it, and inside was a beautiful oil painting of a man sitting in the parlor downstairs. The blues looked a little different, the curtains in the style of the late 1700s, but the man sitting in a wing-back chair was someone I knew. I'd seen his picture before, but he had traded his white coat for a dark, rich suit. His hair was short, more orderly, and he'd grown a mustache. But I would have known him, even if he had a beard. It was my dad, and I knew what I would find when I carefully flipped the painting over. Marcus C. Rim, commissioned 1774 by Warren Fritz. It's framed downstairs now, as are the letters Dad left to me. I think I cherish them more than the house, as well as the knowledge that Dad never really left us. He's always been here, making sure our way was smooth from a gap of generations. Glad you're back. Was just thinking about naps, like I usually do this time of day. Seems like at my age I just can't get enough sleep. But I also can't get enough of telling great stories, like the one we've got coming up. I'm not here to shame anyone. We're always interested in specific things on this channel, things that maybe some people are a little squeamish about. However, they also say it's not so great to meet your heroes, especially if that certain someone is Lady Dragora.
I was speechless when she sent me the message. Even her text looked sexy in the pink curly writing she used. It was short and sweet and to the point, but it still filled my chest with a tightness that wouldn't go away. At the time, it was a dream come true. Meet me at the Hotel Aries at 11 p.m. Don't be late. I couldn't believe this was happening. Tonight, I would meet with Lady Dragora. I guess you could say I have a slight problem with weird fetishes. I discovered pornography when I was young, like most people I know. I was 12, I was horny, and someone I knew said I could find boobs online if I looked. I dived headfirst into a well I don't think I really understood the depths of. Started with generic stuff, naked photos, short clips from films, and led to my current level of kink. I started slow, it was the 90s after all, and internet connections were not what they would become. I have waited all day for a single picture to load, only to be disappointed when the phone rang and everything was lost. Most of my early burgeonings were done in chat rooms, in the steamy squares of private messages. With both of my parents away at work, I was on the computer every day after school. I didn't discover my proclivity for vor until I was in college. When you've been cruising the web for as long as I have, you eventually find yourself into some offbeat stuff. You can't experience that much depravity and not be changed fundamentally, and I was no different. I had recently grown bored with my selection of smut and went looking for something different. When I found Vor, though, I knew I had found something special. Vor, if you're unfamiliar, is a fetish that centers around eating or being eaten by something. In the community of niche communities, Vor is pretty niche. I belong to several online communities where we discuss the acts and the aftermath and trade images online. But I only know a few people in my area who are into it. We meet up once a week to have coffee and gush over our favorite Vor videos and whatnot, and gush over our local legend, Lady Dragora. Lady Dragora was a legend in the Vor scene. She had a subreddit devoted to her videos, a Snapchat full of fans who hungered for her next performance, and a legion of fans willing to pay exorbitant fees for her live shows and recordings. She wouldn't tell people her age, but most of us guess she's in her 30s. She has this long, dark hair that falls in straight waves of ebony silk, and her eyes hold the slight hint of some Asian parentage, maybe. She's beautiful, she's exotic, and she was a total sadist. Lady Dragora made the kind of videos that were illegal everywhere. She made the sort of videos that came with a price tag payable in cryptocurrency. I had seen other so-called Vor videos before her, but many were obviously fake, obviously staged, or obviously CGI. People would eat mice only to have a jump cut before they started chewing. They would dangle CGI mice over their gaping maws. They would pretend to eat things or eat things they were pretending were alive. And after a while, it just becomes a little old. Her videos were something different. The first video I ever saw involved her eating a rat the size of her hand. The video opened on a terrarium full of squirming rats, not mice, sewer rats. And as she approached the tank, they all began to go wild. They ran over the top of each other, squealing in pure terror. It was as though they sensed a bigger predator coming and wanted to be sure her eyes didn't fall on them. She was dressed in what would become her signature black bodice, garters, black choker, black elbow-length gloves, and long leather knee-high boots. Some videos seemed to require music laid over the top, but not hers. When she reached inside the tank, you could hear the rats screaming and flailing inside as they tried desperately to avoid her hand. She selected one of them and pulled him out with a gloved hand. The rat squirmed and kicked, visibly distressed by her, but she paid him no mind. She replaced the lid and walked away from the tank with the screaming rodent. Their cries were high-pitched, almost pig-like, and you could hear them off camera in low waves. The video cut to her, holding the rat up to the camera, still squirming and biting as it struggled to free itself. She held it too tight in her clenched fist, and its fur seemed to boil around that fist like water overflowing a glass. I expected a jump cut when she opened her mouth and leaned over the rat's head. It screamed pitifully as her teeth encircled its writhing head. He bit at her, lashing out with those sharp teeth, but if she felt it, she seemed not to notice. It spasmed as her teeth began to close around its head, and I watched, thinking to myself that the jump cut would be any minute now. This will be when the video jags, and her teeth will close around a plastic rat. She'll be just another pretender, just another charlatan, just another... The blood flowed out as the rat made its final scream. Her teeth sank into it and tore at its skin. When she came away, she was chewing, and the rat's body twitched in her hand as she ate. The twitching stopped before she went back for another bite, but the blood made a macabre sort of fountain as it ran down her gloved fingers and pattered to the floor. She ate the whole rat, one bite at a time, bones and all, and as the tail disappeared down her throat, I was hooked. I'd probably watched about a dozen of her videos before I dared to show anyone. Sometimes she bit, which was hot, but sometimes it seemed that she would just swallow whatever she was eating whole. She'd worry it down with very little difficulty, her throat bulging as whatever it was slid down, and to me, that was more erotic than the chewing. It wasn't just rodents either. Eels, mice, more rats. chicks, they all went down her throat, while my friends and I paid $79.99 a video. 2 months ago, she put a small camera on a mouse and swallowed it whole while videoing its descent into her stomach. The camera must have cost her quite a bit. Between the size of the camera, the night vision interface, and the video's price, I knew it wouldn't be something we could expect often. The footage changed the way I'd viewed my fetish. Watching something struggle in her stomach, watching its final moments, was far more intimate than watching her swallow it whole. I told her as much on the comment section of her website. I spilled my guts to her, hoping to impress her, and somehow it worked. I wish I knew what would come of that stupid comment. I was shocked when she responded. I'd been sitting at the coffee bar with the other members of our group, Doug and Matt and David. We were all discussing the latest video by Lady D when my phone chirped loudly. I looked down to check it and saw a banner informing me that Lady Dragora has responded to your comment. I almost spewed hot coffee on Doug before opening the message and reading what she'd written. The guys leaned in close, wondering what I'd seen to garner such attention, and when he saw the sender, he too almost spit coffee in surprise. I opened her message, and it said 8 short words. How profound. I would love to chat sometime. Dave whistled through his teeth. Wow, she rarely talks to fans. You're in, man. And so I was. As they sat crowded around me, I answered her, and she immediately began our strange correspondence. I didn't question it at the time, but the speed with which she picked up our conversations should have triggered a red flag or two. It was as though she were just waiting for me to respond, waiting for her prey to wander into her field of influence so she could snap the trap shut and watch it squirm. For 3 months, we chatted almost every day. We talked about everything. Music, food, the usual getting to know you stuff. We eventually made it to topics that were a little more personal. It turned out that she held some strange beliefs about life force, believed that consuming the flesh of living creatures would give her their life force and extend her own life somehow. I asked her if she'd ever eaten human flesh, but she just joked that maybe I'd find out someday and danced around the subject. The more I talked to her, the more I became certain that she had traveled much and knew things that I could only guess at. She spoke about distant places and strange customs. If I hadn't been so enchanted by the attention of a celebrity, I might have seen the numerous red flags she was putting up. She talked a lot about places you didn't see on the Travel Channel, sites that didn't have names you could scrawl across a map, locations both ancient and remote. A month ago, she asked me if I would roleplay with her. I agreed, of course, because I was hooked on her attention. Even in my haze of glamour, though, I knew there was something a little off. Her persona was that of a large reptile, and mine was always of some prey animal fit only for ingestion. She would describe my end, my passing between large and ancient lips, and my slow descent towards the transition into nutrition. I would describe my struggles, my vain attempts at escape, but she would always catch me and describe in loving detail my demise at her jaws. I loved it. After all, this was my thing, and I often walked away from our sessions with a bounce in my step. People probably had a hard time understanding how someone achieves satisfaction at the idea of being devoured, but to me, it was no different than any other obsession. We would roleplay twice a week, her scenarios and story threads becoming darker as they went, and before long, she wasn't just swallowing me whole, but tearing into me and getting a little violent. I was less on board with these instances. Imagining myself going through these pains were never my thing, but she always smoothed it over with personalized videos or custom works just for me. She made me feel special, made me feel accepted, and that's what made it easy to draw me in. This was also when I was approached by Justin. His screen name was Furrylocks on the board in question. Until he messaged me, I'd never even heard of him, though it seemed we moved in similar circles. My only correspondence with him was a message left in my inbox one morning. It was hastily written, full of spelling errors, and intrigued me to no end. I read it twice before class, and when I showed it to my friends in the Vor group, they brushed it off as a jealous fan. His message was not long, but it did make me question some rumors I'd heard on some of the other boards. It read, "You don't know me. My name is Justin. I understand that you've become close with an internet personality known as Lady Dragora. I don't know how much you know about her, but she may or may not be 100% what she seems to be. I had a friend whom I'd known since grade school. He caught the attention of the lady, and it was the happiest I'd ever seen him. Their relationship was brief, a month or two. Then one night, he told me she'd invited him to her hotel room. I didn't think anything of it until he didn't respond to my calls or texts for 2 days. He's been missing for 3 months now, and your new lady friend has either blocked me or refused to respond to any of my messages. I'm not trying to turn you away from your current relationship, whatever that might entail. I'm simply trying to warn you to be on your guard." I was hesitant to respond. It seemed better to just ignore him. But after a particularly grisly RP session a week later, I decided to message him and get some information. I was still very much under her spell, but some of our conversations had made me wary. After all, she was still a stranger on the internet. Growing up at an age of stranger danger, I was very wary of people online pretending to be someone they weren't, a collection of online videos or not. However, my message was never opened, never read, and when the invitation to her hotel room came across my box, I decided to put my fears aside and go for it. That's how I came to be in her hotel room at 11 p.m. She sent me the text around 6 in the afternoon. "Meet me at the Hotel Aries at 11 p.m. Don't be late," was all it said, but it was enough to get my blood running hot. The Hotel Aries was not a huge hotel, but it was one of the largest in this part of Chicago. The borough of Chicago was an hour from campus, but I drove the distance gladly. If she told me to drive to New York that night, I'd have done it. And with the invitation being so close to home, I decided I would be a fool not to accept. I told my friends from the coffee shop where I was going. They told me to take some video and let me know when they got home. I set out for the hotel in high spirits, my mind flooded with possibilities. I had arrived early, 2 hours early, hoping that maybe we could have a meal before whatever was going to happen tonight. I inquired at the front desk, and the man behind the counter gave me a knowing little smile as he slid the key card across to me. "She's gone out for a little while, but she mentioned that she likely had a guest coming tonight." "Have fun," he said. I started up to the elevator, wondering how often he'd had to do this for her. How often did she have guests? I took the elevator up to the penthouse and found a lavish one-bedroom suite decked out in rich fabrics and expensive furniture. I recognized it as the backdrop for many of her videos and found a camera already set up in the corner. She had left me a note, too, telling me to make myself at home and that she would be back at 11. The waiting was nerve-wracking. I took a seat on her luxurious couch and just sat there. My mind raced, going over possibilities and scenarios and making me a nervous wreck of anticipation. When the elevator finally came up to the penthouse, I felt a surge of excitement that my patience might finally pay off. She was framed in the elevator door as they opened, and it was the first time I'd ever met her in person. She wore a long tan coat and the same black boots she'd worn in her videos. Her shiny black hair was pulled back into its accustomed tail. As she stepped off the elevator, she let her coat puddle on the floor, and I could see her familiar black corset. She smiled when she saw me, and as I rose to greet her, she held out a finger, indicating me to stand and be quiet. She circled me, drinking me in with her eyes. The hungry way she looked at me made me both incredibly aroused and extremely uncomfortable. She was looking at me the way I look at a particularly tasty meal. Though this was certainly what I wanted, I had never seen someone look at another person that way before. She didn't say a word, just walked over to the camera and pointed it towards me. As she turned, I saw the red light was on. Looked like I was going to be in one of her movies tonight. "Don't worry," she said, her voice hinting at foreign places and exotic locales. "This is just for me. I'd never post anything online without your consent." I smiled at her and started to disrobe, but she stopped me with a delicate finger. "Leave them on. I like to handle the clothes myself. She stepped away from me then, eyes smoldering as she held me in her gaze, and then something happened. If you've ever seen one of those old werewolf movies, the kind where their whole body shifts in a rapid and sudden transformation, then you may have some idea of what I saw. If not, I'll try to explain it as best I can. Her body seemed to ripple, her whole form shuddering like an image in a pond, and suddenly there was something else in front of me. Her body was a long mass of jade scales towering 12 feet high. As it reached its full height, it had to crouch to avoid hitting the ceiling, but this seemed to suit it just fine. It crouched to eye level, its spade-shaped head hovering inches from my body, and I realized that its eyes, those vast and hovering pools of death, were the same as hers. I was trapped by those eyes, like a bird before the snake, and when she struck, I never even had a chance to run. If you're reading this, then your next question must be, how am I even writing this? Being eaten is normally where the story like this would end, but unfortunately for me, it's not. Lady Dragora, that queen serpent of myth, has been dining on humans for a very long time, it would seem. She neither bit nor tore me. Instead, she struck with a precision born of years of practice and swallowed me whole with little effort. As I slid down her throat, I felt the slimy walls caress me and the suffocating darkness inviting me towards terror. She had let me keep my phone, however, and as I wiggled to get it, I could feel a new sensation coursing through the giant muscles that were her body, the squirming desire for more. That's when I realized what she wanted. She doesn't want a quick meal. She doesn't want a satisfying feed. She wants a terrified body to thrash and scream as her body does what it does best. She wants my last few hours to be her pleasure. So I've been sitting as still as I can for the last hour of my life, writing this message to the outside world. I've sent a copy to my friends at the coffee shop, a copy to the Chicago police, and I've posted a copy here, hoping that someone will read this and take it seriously. I now know what happened to Justin's missing friend, what likely happened to Justin himself, and the fate that awaits me at the end of my life. I want my death to be the last, though, so if you read this and you see her, don't fall for her games. Don't let yourself be another meal for Lady Dragora.
One last story for you, and I can assure you that, at least in my own mind, I've saved the best for last. It's no secret that folk tales are some of my favorite things. Living in the Appalachian countryside for a few years, I seem to be inundated with tales of fairy lights and Bigfoots and maybe darker things. But some of my favorite tales come out of Mexico, like today's little story about a particular boogin named Lechuza.
I need to tell someone about this, mostly to get it off my chest, but also because, screwed up as the situation is, it's one of the best stories I've ever heard. I attend a large university in Arizona. I won't say which. But my friends and I were sharing a bottle of Jack the other night, and we started sharing stories. Somehow, we got on the subject of spooky stories, and it appeared that several of us had a strange occurrence to talk about. Gabriel told us about a weird apartment that he and his mother had lived in when they were in West Virginia. Apparently his mother had woken up screaming one night after a dark figure had appeared over her bed. He had come in and found it melting away into nothing, and the two of them had moved out shortly thereafter. John told us about a weird deer he'd seen on a hunting trip, and I told them about a sound I'd heard outside my parents' house in Montana throughout my childhood. One of Dad's friends, he was a zoologist or something, said it didn't sound like any animal he was familiar with. Dad jokingly asked him if it was a Bigfoot or something. He never really quite denied it. He got spooky quiet and just said he wouldn't be caught out dead in the woods, especially not after dark. We never went camping out there anymore, but we certainly never went past the property line either after dark. passed the bottle to Samuel, and for once, he actually took a sip. Samuel, or Sam for short, had been living in the dorm since before we'd arrived at university. He was in his third year and was studying engineering as he worked toward the bachelor's degree. He had told us several stories about growing up in a small town in Mexico and how his uncle was thanks to his current status as a student. His uncle was a professor of Spanish studies and antiquities, and he had offered to help his nephew get a student visa so he could do more than drink shitty beer in the local bar and do manual labor his whole life. I opened up saying that it was weird to see Samuel drink, but I don't think you understand how strange it was. Samuel was our permanent designated driver because in the 2 years that we'd known him, I had never so much as seen him touch a bottle of alcohol, unless it was to throw it away or take it from us when we had enough. He took a moment to collect his thoughts before saying in a hollow voice, "Told you all I grew up in Mexico, right?" We all nodded. He continued, "Well, I grew up in this rural little town right outside of Hermosillo. It wasn't large, maybe 8,000 people in the whole town, and most of our work came from the processing plant or from the farms that operated around the small town. My mother and I lived there with my abuelo and my abuela. My uncle was living in America and sending money back when he could. My abuelo was a horse breeder, something my family had practiced for generations, and he would work for the stockman for one of the larger ranches in the area. We weren't quite as well off as the rancher, but we were doing okay. Wasn't a bad life. It was hard, but not without its pleasures. When I was in high school, my friends and I would go to parties held at the local farms. The rancher's son, Santiago, and I had been friends since we were young, and we palled around with some of the ranch hand sons, Juan, Christopher, and Mateo. We were good friends, probably the best friends I've ever had, but one night we found something that none of us quite believed in. We had all grown up with stories about La Llorona or El Cibon, but my mother always loved to use a certain legend to scare me. La Lechuza was a witch who turned herself into some sort of owl demon after her death. She was said to roam the lands, hunting for drunks or just children out after dark. She would make noises in the night to trick you into opening your window so she could steal your eyes. She would pretend to be a baby to lure you into the woods. She would create thunderstorms and other nasty things and would come to get naughty children if they acted out. La Lechuza was used a lot in my house to get me to do things like chores or homework that I really didn't want to do. By the time I was a teenager, though, I was kind of done with my mom's scary stories about owl ladies. I was much more interested in drinking with my friends and meeting girls. I was 16 when she caught me on my way out the door. "I know where you're going off to. I beg you, do not go out there and drink with your friends." I brushed her off, saying I was of age, and if I wanted to go hang out with my friends, then I would. And if La Lechuza would happen across you in your group? I scoffed, telling her that her stories didn't scare me anymore. "That story is what killed your father," she started to say, but I cut her off. Dad had died in a drunk driving accident before I was born. He had driven off the road and hit a tree, his car erupting into a ball of flame, and that's why we had nothing to bury. But Mom had insisted that it had been La Lechuza who had driven him off the road. This had made me even scareder of the creature when I was a kid, but now it made me mad that she would use my father's death like this. I left without another word, climbing into Santiago's car as it pulled away from my house for the last time. She was standing in the road crying as we drove off. That image will be scarred into my brain until the day I die. We were out late. I couldn't tell you much about the party, just that it was in someone's barn. The beer was hot, the women were lukewarm, and the music was subpar at best. I drank too much, trying to get the fight with my mom out of my head, and by the time we called it a night, I was well and truly drunk. We climbed into Santiago's car, all of us laughing and tipsy. We started out, Santiago managing to keep it on the road, as we whooped and hollered in the back seat. He was laughing along with us, turning the music up on the radio, but when he swerved suddenly, we all screamed like banshees. He hauled us back on the road, Mateo opening the window to vomit, and I leaned up as I asked him what was wrong. He looked pale, all the tipsy scared out of him as he stammered, "I thought there was an old lady in the road, but when she turned, her body looked wrong." I said how weird it was to see someone so old out this late, but suddenly I yelled for him to look. Something was in the road, and if it was what he had seen before, he had been absolutely right. It was hunched over, a long cloak on its shoulders, and it looked deformed. It turned to look at the car as it barreled forward, and I could see piercing red eyes that bore into my soul. I saw it all in the space of 5 seconds, maybe, but those eyes will stay with me forever. Santiago never had a chance to do anything. He just plowed right into her, doing 55. The car suddenly stopped dead, and I came to about a minute later. I had boffed my head pretty good on the seat, but one look at Santiago told me I had gotten off lucky. He had slammed into the windshield, breaking his neck and turning his skull into a rotten gourd. The others seemed to be okay, but the car was smoking, and we climbed out as we assessed the damage. The whole front end was smashed in like we'd hit a tree or a big rock, but nothing was in the road to be hit. I remembered the old lady and moved off to check the ditches, thinking maybe we had knocked her off the road. The others just milled about, not sure what to do, and that's when it happened. The moon was full that night, or I may very well have missed it. A shadow passed over me, a thing with a wingspan like a condor, and I looked up just in time to see it drop onto my friends as they stood huddled around the car. It had landed on Juan, breaking his back and riding him to the ground. He screamed. He screamed watery and miserable. He wouldn't scream for long, though. The bird dropped its head and began to feed on him, its beak plunging and diving as the other two backed away in horror. When it looked up, face dripping blood and owl eyes glaring at me, I ran. I don't know if the other two ran at the time, but I felt like a mouse who'd seen an owl. I ran, still drunk and weaving, and the houses swam up in my peripherals. I could still hear that wet, crunching sound as the creature fed, and I stumbled as my feet hit a root. I kept running, kept moving, kept showing my heels as the houses wobbled like an oil painting all around me. I just kept running, knowing that my house couldn't be far, not noticing the lack of night sounds until it was too late. When that unearthly screech split the night, I panicked and turned a corner at random. When my foot hit a pothole, I thought for sure I was going to die. My world suddenly exploded with light, and I stumbled back on my hands and butt as a bright something nearly blinded me. I turned, putting my back to those blinding lights, and saw a horror as it descended. The headlights spotlighted the owl thing, and as it swooped down on me, I figured this was the end. I closed my eyes and put my hands up across my face, preparing for the end. That's when I heard my mom yelling at the thing. She came out of the car, shouting curses and brandishing a cross on a long silver chain. The owl monster flapped its wings, changing its course and taking off again. It screeched loudly, flapping those wings angrily as it flew away. My mother helped me into the car then, but I must have passed out, because I woke up in my bed the next morning. I would have believed it was a dream if Mom hadn't told me all about it as we sat at the breakfast table. She had made food, and there was a pot of coffee there as well. As I ate, she told me all of it. How the creature had killed my dad one night as he drove home drunk. How Santiago and Juan had been found dead that morning. How my other friends had never arrived home that night. She spelled it out for me and told me how lucky I was to be alive. She said I had been given a chance and that it was up to me to figure out how to use it. She wasn't happy with my answer after I'd thought about it for a few days, but I think she understood. I still went to those parties, but I never drank again. Instead, I helped people get home safely. I never saw that creature again, but there were nights that I imagined I could feel its hateful stare. I was taking its prey from it, stealing its food, and it never quite forgave me for that. Not a day goes by that I don't think about that night and my friends who died. We sat there, drinking as we listened to his story, a cold chill flowing through us as we took it all in. I'd say this was the end, but that wouldn't do him or his story justice. 3 weeks ago, Samuel came to me in tears and told me that his mother was going to die. I sat him down. He was shaking like a leaf, and asked him how he could possibly know that. Before that, I hadn't seen him in class in a few days, and he looked tired and rattled. I dreamed I was in my mother's house, the one she has on my grandparents' property, and I heard her crying. I walked into the living room, and she was sitting at the kitchen table. I walked up behind her, putting a hand on her shoulder, and asked her what was wrong. She grabbed my arm, and her hand had become a claw. Her head turned around, and she screeched at me through that owl beak. Her face had become that of the Owl Witch, and just before I woke up, she screamed my mother's name. I asked him what that meant, and he said, "Some people say that seeing her in a dream means that someone you love will die. She screamed my mother's name. Can't ignore that." 3 days later, he told me he was returning home for his mother's funeral. They found her in her room. She'd had a heart attack. I need to go home and say goodbye. Will you watch my plants while I'm away? I told him I would, but I think he knew he wasn't coming back. A week ago, I asked his uncle if there was any news. His uncle only sighed and told me that his nephew was missing. My mother tells me that he went to the house he and his mother had shared. No one has seen him since. We don't know where he is, but if you're still watering his plants, I'll pick them up this afternoon. Hopefully, I can give them to him when he comes back. I don't know what became of Sam, but I pray that the Owl Witch, Lechuza, did not get him.
That's gonna do it for us today, kiddos. But don't be sad. We'll see you again tomorrow, I'm sure, for more great tales and more comfy times. Until then, this is Dr. Plague, wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.